Hey, it's Nikachu, and today we are going to take a look at the worst blunder in a Magic the Gathering Pro Tour Finals. This is Game 2 of 1999 Pro Tour Chicago between Rookie of the Year Brian Davis versus the Great One pro player Bob Maher Jr. Brian is playing Necropotence. The namesake card of this deck is a deadly enchantment that says you can't draw your card each turn as usual, but you can pay 1 life to set cards aside and put them in your hand at end of turn. So if you have 19 life to spare, you can effectively draw 19 cards. That's broken! The deck wins with direct damage spells that simultaneously gain life at the same time, like Drain Life and Corrupt. For each damage these cards deal, Brian will gain that much life, and the more life means more cards from Necropotence. There's a reason why this is one of the most deadliest cards in Magic's history. Brian is up against Bob's Oath of Druids deck. What this card effectively says is at the beginning of your turn, if one of your opponents has more creatures than you, you can reveal cards from the top of your library until you find a creature card and put it into play. In this case, Bob would be looking for Morphling, but the problem is going into game 2. Brian took out all his creatures from his Necro deck, so Oath of Druids is completely useless. Alternatively, Bob will have to win the game with his lands that turn into creatures, like Treetop Village and Fairy Conclave. Bob can control the Necro deck with counter magic like Counter Spell and Force of Will. These cards will answer anything Brian might play. So will the rookie teach the pros some new tricks, or will Bob show everyone why he's the great one? Let's take a look at the action.
And Dirk did not have the Enlightened Shooter base, so Compost wasn't nearly as good for him. Yeah, Davis mulliganed. But Dirk randomly drew his 1 Compost, and it made Pat's game absolutely miserable. Every time he did anything, Dirk got to draw a card, and Necro just can't operate under situations like that. So there's Bob's hand. He's got 3 land and a good mix of spells. That's Ivory. Is that Ivory Mask? Or Sacred Ground?
Sacred Ground.
Oh, that's Sacred Ground, which came in from the sideboard. Tutor, Counterspell, Sacred Ground. Takes the Tutor. That seems like the right call, don't you think?
Brian's best defense against Bob's control cards are with discard spells, like Duress, which lets him look at his opponent's hand and discard a non-creature, non-land card. Brian chooses Enlightened Tutor, which would let Bob find his best enchantment spell and put it on top of his deck, because traditionally, black-based decks get crushed by enchantments.
Impulse, pretty good card.
Yeah, this is one of those things where you lose the match that you're supposed to win, you're demoralized, and it's just hard to come back mentally. I mean, he hasn't really had any decisions here. His draw is fairly poor, especially considering his draw in the first game.
Well, we'll stand up second with both.
This is Brian Davis's first Pro Tour, as we keep saying. He's trying to become the 3rd straight rookie to win a Pro Tour Chicago. But he actually does have a lot of tournament experience. We talked to some of the judges from Memphis, and he's played something on the order of 30 Pro Tour qualifiers before he finally won one. He won a 34-person UBC qualifier with a Squirrel Prison deck. Started playing Magic during Mirage, so does have a fair amount of tournament experience. He's one of the more active players from Memphis. And by the way, the best performance ever for a Memphis player before this tournament was 210th. He's the first Memphis player to crack the 200, top 200.
Well, he keeps drawing more ways to get rid of the counter magic in Bob's hand, so if he eventually does draw into Necropotence, he could actually come back in this game.
So Brian's been trying to attack Bob's hand with Unmask, which is a discard spell. What are you doing over there, Bob? Bob protects his hand with his counter spells. Ain't none of your damn business what I'm doing. But Bob's used all his counter spells, so his shields are down for Brian to make a big play.
Oh, Sacred Ground. Doesn't do a lot, but stops Wasteland, so seems worth committing to the board. Oh, that beats Spinning Darkness, doesn't it? Or does it, or does it not beat Spinning Darkness? If Spinning Darkness kills a Treetop Village while Sacred Ground's in play. What happens? The damage kills it? Okay, so that does not beat Spinning Darkness.
Well, there's a card that he really wanted, and it's Enlightened Tutor. But he opts not to take it. What did he take
Did he take
instead?
Treetop Village?
No,
Treetop Village number 3?
I don't think so. That would be really surprising if he did. Did he really?
He's
Oh, did
going
he get
be-
duressed? Oh, if he
No,
got,
that was an impulse.
oh, that was an impulse? No, he got duressed.
Oh, he got duress.
That's why he took
He
the
impulsed
Treetop
as a
Village.
response to duress.
Okay, yeah, that's the correct play. I knew he
Oh,
wouldn't
okay.
take that if he...
Good play. He knew that he was going to lose the impulse.
Yeah, it was unfortunate that he didn't have one more white open so he could get the Enlightened Tutor and use 6 additional rolls to Enlightened Tutor before the duress could go off.
That's a good point.
But he's in good shape. He'll be able to
gonna
hit him
go
a couple
beatdown.
times.
Right?
Yeah, that's what I would definitely be doing.
Oh,
jeez, where did that
compost
come
off
from?
the top.
Good God. That's about the worst thing
Yes.
he could have dropped right there.
In Magic, we have the saying, you can't discard what we draw off the top of the deck. And Bob found a compost, which says whenever a black card is put in an opponent's graveyard, you get to draw a card. So if the Necro deck plays discard spells or damage spells, Bob's gonna draw cards to get back in this game. Brian has to get rid of that compost.
Worst thing for Brian. Best thing for the hometown fans. There's Consult. So Necro can hit the table right now.
Well,
And
he's probably gonna have
Bob only
do
gets to
it.
draw 1 card this turn off Brian.
Nice top deck. Want a conversation in here? Oh, don't rip that trigger. Want a conversation? Yeah, sure.
He does indeed consult for Necro. That's got to be what he does.
We aren't his Necropotence, correct? I'm assuming that. Just making sure.
Compost will really offset all that hand destruction.
Well, he didn't lose anything that bad.
No, he needs
so
to
far.
get the disc, right?
Oh, that was very good.
That was an excellent Necro.
The
Excellent consult.
only really relevant card I think he lost was the Corrupt.
Yep.
He has a Persecute, but Persecute at this point in the game is not much better than a Duress.
He needs to play Necro. He needs to have Bob not draw a counterspell. Put Necro on the table. Bob drew Fairy Conclave. Now what has to happen is he needs a disc before that compost gets Bob back into the game.
Brian got himself a demonic consultation. What you can do is name a card, then you remove the top 6 cards of your deck from the game, and then you start flipping over cards until you find the name card. He named Necropotence. And with a fresh life total, Brian's going to pay life to refill his hand full of cards. The Skullman took this game from Tour de France to Formula 1 in a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
He needs to disc away composter. It's just
No.
I think Bob will draw so many cards that
Yeah, it's tough too because of the treetop villages.
yeah, those villages are going to start to hit hard.
Yeah, sacred ground.
Instead.
So he draws. There's the disc
That's
and a wasteland, which doesn't do anything. There's a persecute. So I believe on his next turn he can play. Yes, he can play persecute and disc.
If you didn't notice, these games are being played without sleeves. It might be bad for the cards, but back then it helped reduce the glare so that we can watch the game.
Necropotence.
Smash like if that hurt to watch.
Okay.
Is it worth for Davis to cast Ritual Persecute with Compost in play? Doesn't it might even be worth it? It's going to be down card advantage, down cards.
Probably not. Although, yeah.
Treetop Village. Okay. Attack.
Yeah, there's no real reason to because you can discount Force of Will.
So with nothing else to do, Bob tries to win the game the old-fashioned way. No, not by cheating. Attacking with creatures. Bob activated his Treetop Village to attack Brian for 3 damage. And the lower Brian's life gets, the less cards he gets to draw with Necropotence.
There's the disc.
Okay.
So Bob doesn't have an immediate answer for it.
Right.
The Necro deck has one way to deal with enchantments, and that is Navinral's Disc. Tap it to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So Brian will destroy his own Necropotence, but not without destroying Bob's compost. But the disc comes into play tapped, and you need to tap it in order to activate it, so Brian has to wait a turn before he blows up the board.
Yeah, all the cards in his hand are pretty much stuff he wants to keep.
Right.
Yeah.
2's fine. I mean, he's probably gonna spend his next turn casting a big drain. So it's not like he needs to find a new plan.
That's good.
Davis is down to 9. Of course, there's those treetop villages.
But for now, he really needs to find a way of dealing with those treetop villages.
Sure.
And he's probably wishing he had that wasteland back.
This is game 2 of a 5-game match, and in Magic, we're allowed to exchange our bad cards for better ones between games. And Bob left Swords to Plowshares in his deck, a removal spell for creatures, and the creature's controller gains life equal to that creature's power. But Brian's Necro deck doesn't have any creatures! So is this a smooth brain mistake by Bob, or is it a 3D chess big brain play in the making?
Yeah, Bob still has the Swords to Plowshares in his deck, which is absolutely pretty worthless. I mean, he can plow his own creatures. That's all he can do with it.
Yeah. He doesn't know that, but...
Reflecting Pull allowed Bob access to 2 green mana.
Right.
To activate 2 treetop villages.
Now see, this is where if Davis has to cast Consult, it would really help Bob, because then he would be able to see that there aren't any... Right. Yeah, might as well corrupt him.
Corrupt you for 7. That resolves, putting Davis back to 10.
Yep.
Maher drops to 13. Bob does get to draw a card.
Necro for 1.
Yeah, the Sacred Ground will...
And stuff. Go ahead.
Bob's not drawing all that strong this game.
Counterspell.
He just has a counterspell on the plow, which is useless. 2 land. The treetop villages are still really difficult to get rid of, though.
Yeah. He should attack, right? He should attack.
Doesn't
make
really matter
Davis
either
blow
way.
his disc. Well, doesn't
Yeah.
he want the disc gone?
Yeah, he does. So he should attack, but but he should try to leave two blue open.
Sacred Ground will put any creatures that die to the disc back in play, even though the disc is destroying Sacred Ground. Bob fires up Fairy Conclave. He's gonna fire up Treetop Village and leave up 2 blue, right? Seems like, yeah, tap both Treetop Villages. That way he can leave the Reflecting Pool untapped and have 3 blue sources available. He doesn't lose to Wasteland.
Sorry.
Davis has to blow the disc here, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's where it was really his intention. This was
And-
kind of all predetermined.
So Bob attacks with his creature lands, and Brian is forced to pop his Navinral's disc, blowing up the board. But remember, these creatures double as lands, and Bob has Sacred Ground, which says whenever your opponent causes you to put your lands into your graveyard, you can put them directly back onto the battlefield. And like gum at the bottom of his shoe, Brian can't get rid of these creatures.
The Necropotence, by the way, the same ruling that allows Bob's land to come back into play, also hurts Brian in that Bob gets to draw a card off his compost when the Necro goes to the graveyard. So Bob got another card up out of that.
Right. Bob drew several cards off that compost, but unfortunately his draw has been relatively poor, and he hasn't been able to draw the
Well, I mean-
high-quality cards that he had game 1.
And then drain for... yeah. But Bob has a counterspell, so he's going to persecute blue, presumably.
Blue.
You don't need to name yet. He said persecute blue. The right play is to say persecute. Are you countering? But he tipped his hand. He did the same thing with a consult earlier.
So oddly, the correct play here, if he could see Bob's hand, would be to say
He
good done.
says done.
And Davis, who seems to have...
He's afraid of Force of Will. Bob only has 2 cards in his hand.
I don't
now,
think...
can Brian win this game if Bob has Force of Will? How does it help to let Bob untap? How does that help?
I don't know. I think someone's standing behind Bob and signaling to Davis what Bob has in his hand, because this guy's just crazy. He seems to always know what to do. Always. It's just amazing. Like, it's uncanny. Like, once in a while he'll make a mistake, but for the vast majority of the time, he seems to have, like, some psychic ability to know when to hold off and when to go for it. I don't really understand it, because he wouldn't know the Swords of Plowshares in his hand.
I'm not convinced he should be playing around Plow.
Yeah, he
can
probably
do that
shouldn't
next
be,
turn.
but it's going to work for his advantage hugely, given that Bob didn't draw a counterspell, and as long as Brian Davis still tries to corrupt and drain life him out.
He drew a land, so now he's fine.
Now he's got to do it. I mean, his back's to the wall now. There's no stopping it here.
Corrupt you. How much? 9. Sure.
Corrupt you for 9? Sure. All right, Davis goes up to 12. Bob drops to 4.
The fact that Corrupt Resolve dealing a ton of damage to Bob means that he has no counterspell. Brian should know that the defenses are down.
If Davis thinks it through, he should know there's no counterspell in Bob's hand. Now, will Bob draw a counterspell? He draws a Lightning Tutor. That should do it. Davis should win this game. Remarkable.
Bob to win? Despite discarding a Wasteland, Davis wins anyway. He just outraces him with drains and corrupts to the head.
This is a very, very exciting final. I think this might go down to the wire.
Yeah, now Davis has got to have a little confidence. If he really does win this game, he's still a little nervous right now. He's like, Bob draws a counterspell. Bob pulled stuff out, had something up his sleeve last game.
The only thing we had better hope is that he doesn't drain him for 4. He's got to drain him for the full maximum.
Yeah, the only way Maher wins this game is if Davis drains for 4. I mean, Davis could say drain for 4. If Davis says drain for 4, then Maher is going to take a 2-0 lead.
Yeah, and we might see a grown man cry.
He's 15, he's not a grown man. Yeah, as long as Davis sinks everything into the drain, he wins. 2 treetop villages knock Davis down to 6.
Brian just committed a cardinal sin. He tapped on Bob's lucky charm, the Beanie Baby. Never touch another man's Beanie Baby.
So it's 6-4. Did Brian just reach over and tap Miser's Cage? Yeah, he reached over, he tapped the Miser's Cage. Come on, don't say 4! Shh, don't, guys, be quiet. Oh my God. I can't believe he did that. All he has to do is tap 3 more lands.
What's amazing here?
It's too late. He said drain life for 4. It's on the stack.
What's amazing here is the top deck of the disc is the worst card he can draw because then he's
left
actually
4 mana
tempted to leave the 4 mana open for the disc. If he draws an utter piece of garbage, he won't keep 4 mana open for the disc. And guess what happens next turn? He's got an Enlightened Tutor in his hand.
Oh my.
So Bob's down to 4 life with his back against the wall. And Brian has enough lands in play to play Drain Life for 8 damage. Brian plays Drain Life for 4. But the card he didn't play around, perhaps because he did not even think that Bob could still have it in his deck, was the Swords to Plowshares. Instead of removing his opponent's creatures, he removes his own and gets that sweet 3 life out of it, keeping his head above water.
So despite the
it's an aura. How can he...
But all Brian had to do was tap 3 more lands, deal 7 damage, and even the swords couldn't protect Bob. What an absolute blunder.
Bob Maher Jr.
You should go for the 2 casting cost Null Rod.
He scoops.
And Brian is so embarrassed, he scoops out of shame. Brian wasn't even dead. The Drain Life brought him back to 10 life, and Bob's creature lands can only attack back for 8 damage. The rookie continues to make rookie mistakes. Well, that's my video for today. Have you ever made a blunder that easily could have won you the game? Share your story in the comments section below. Smash like for Beanie Babies, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, or Bob's gonna come and shuffle your vintage cards.